Hello, everyone. This is Anthony Korf, Artistic Director and Composer in Residence at Riverside Symphony. And I am very pleased to introduce and welcome my dear colleague, Gregg August, who is the featured composer on our June 5th concert.
Hello, thank you.
You're most welcome, Gregg. I've known Gregg for many years, and I've known him exclusively as a virtuoso, and not just a virtuoso, but even more important, a fantastic musician, bass player. I believe, Gregg, you have played with Riverside Symphony many years ago.
Definitely.
Gregg also has a very rare talent of being a very accomplished jazz musician, which itself involves a certain amount of composing, as we know. Gregg, I did not know until very recently that you also composed. And ironically, even though I generally curate the new music on the concert, it was George, our conductor, who discovered your piece, which was an immediate hit with both of us. Have you been composing long? How does composing come from your own musical life, and when did you start? Have you been doing it all along? And I'm just
yes, I would say. I mean, I always knew I would get to it, but it was coming more from a jazz sort of area of my life. I grew up playing. Actually, I grew up playing drums and piano, and because of the piano, I had learned harmony and theory and all that. And then when I went to school, I took a lot of writing classes. I had always that pursuit or that idea that I would pursue composing at some point, but again, it was more in a jazz sort of discipline. I took a lot of big band and small group stuff at Eastman writing classes. We did some stuff they called it studio orchestra, which is combined big band and orchestra, which was a great opportunity to start writing for more classical instruments. But then I guess I always just worked at it and started recording some records like 20 years ago. But again, they were jazz records.
For those in our audience who don't know, a bass player in jazz is a supremely well informed in the Department of Music Theory. With what you guys do, and I speak as somebody who has a bass player in my family, as you know, Gregg, and it's quite an achievement. Of course, jazz itself is quite an achievement, especially if you do it well. And no surprise, I think jazz is basically a variation form, is it not?
Absolutely.
So what you guys are doing mostly is playing over changes, and the variation form, I think, would come naturally to a jazz musician. It's I think the most immediately coherent musical form we know, or one of the simplest, to its credit, in a way, straightforward and satisfying. And so what we have here in your work, in your beautiful work, which we'll talk about the theme later. Let's just talk about the variation approach. I wouldn't be surprised if you just started to do it without even thinking about what you were, from a formal standpoint of how you were putting the piece together.
I mean, that's like when you say variations is it's one of the oldest forms that there is. I mean, Bach, obviously, so it's something I think, yes, jazz musicians work on. Even if we're not playing over changes, we're still playing on how to develop theme and melody constantly. You have minimal material, and then what can you do with that? So that's something that I work on constantly. The way the whole thing came to be was Orpheus wanted to do this thing during the pandemic, and we were all trying to figure out how to create content, and they gave me this sort of freedom to come up with an idea. The only thing that they asked was that it would be for violin and for the strings of Orpheus, and that they knew Charles Yang, who was going to be doing it. He had a lot of skills as an improviser. And so had very loose parameters. But when they mentioned, I think I told you, I had mentioned in the liner notes or the program notes that they had brought up this recording of the Hilliard Ensemble with Jan Garbarek, which was from like the 90s, I think. And so Jan Garbarek is a Norwegian jazz musician on the ECM label, very, very well known in that world. And Hilliard Ensemble obviously is a vocal group. They specialize in early music. So the fusion of those two artists, those two groups, was pretty unusual. But I knew that record very, very, very well. And that tune was on there, that Pérotin was on there, and I sort of just when they brought up the record as a reference, it got me thinking, wow, that would be a great thing to work on because it's so simple. And
Right.
I had the idea of maybe just writing variations on it, and they went with it. So I was very lucky that they just sort of they gave me the spark, and then they let me create the idea of the variations, and it was very, very smooth. The whole,
Yeah.
a
Well,
connection
it's
with.
really, yeah. I was immediately, besides the beauty of the piece, one is impressed by the naturalness of it and the kind of unforced, just musicality. It's a musical piece. Just to reinforce one thing that I was talking, just putting another exclamation point on the variation form would be what I was referring to in terms of the length of variation would be blues, which is maybe the easiest of all of the forms
Right.
to recognize in the way that it repeats, and that a talented listener who's not even a musician will have a sense of being in the beginning, the middle, or the end of that
Yeah.
shape, right? And people just know, and you see when people listen to blues, the way they respond to it is partly, I think, not just the cool stuff about it, but just in terms of the length of it and where you are in the sequence. And
Yes.
but I think that the variation form also, I think to your point, or to your response, is that you're given an opportunity to break away from it because the length of the idea is so firmly established that then you can create maybe even a tension, as it were, by extending or truncating the form you're dealing with.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a playground of
Absolutely.
yeah.
It
And
allows you a lot of freedom because you have that base, so to speak, to work from. And yeah, it's a good way of putting it, comparing it to the blues in a way.
yeah, well, um, yeah, there's no bridge, right? There's just those 12 bars. Um,
Yeah.
so tell us about how your musical experience maybe informed perhaps the harmonization or other elements. How does that the integration of Gregg August's musical experience? Uh, I think a good composer, you're ultimately writing music that you would like to listen to, right? Just as our influences are very much an expression of who we are, right? They say, oh, he was influenced by or she was influenced by, but that's already saying something about who that person is, because not everybody is influenced by everybody. So without pointing to a particular influence, because it's not necessary, how does the language of the music reflect Gregg August?
I mean, that's a kind of a hard question to answer.
I did it on purpose.
You did, yeah. I mean, I definitely love Renaissance music. I've been investigating a lot. Well, Jordi Savall, maybe the main person that has guided me through his recordings and sensibility. So, for bass, I've got some bass pieces that I've composed that sort of utilize maybe that sound that he has on the gamba and his groups, where it's very limited vibrato. and sort of beautifully, expressively stoic.
Hmm.
So that was something, and I'm not sure if that answers your question about the harmony. But I was going more for sensibility, I would say. The harmony, I have like, I call them like this sort of my harmonic friends, the chords that I like, I kind of take them wherever
I love that. Harmonic friends. We look
yeah, there's like
forward
certain
to it.
chords, especially there's a thing at letter D. I do know that that's the place in the score that I definitely like use a lot of these sort of sharp five, major seven chords, flat
Hmm.
five, certain chords that I'm not thinking about it. I'm just sort of on the piano finding it. So about harmonic language, I mean, it's all kind of coming from wherever. And yeah, in a jazz, we have that ability to really stretch and try to find sounds. I mean, I don't think I'm finding anything new. I'm stealing from the best.
Well, you know
But
what Stravinsky said about stealing, right?
oh yeah, I love that quote. I use it often.
For everybody, that's the lousy composers borrow and the great composers steal. And
Right.
that's
No,
a very bad paraphrase. I'm sure it was more eloquent.
no, that's exactly what I've heard over the years too. So, I mean, again, I was thinking more about sensibility, again, the Renaissance, and I love the early music player, the way they play Baroque music and this sort of non-vibrato thing. I mean, I didn't really get too specific with the group when they played it. I have it in the score, as you see, but I didn't get too emphatic about that because we had very limited rehearsal time.
Right,
But that's
right.
what I was saying, I'm just sort of using the chords in certain sections that I would use maybe anywhere.